Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. This webinar is going to be with Anteris Technologies. I've got with me here today Wayne Paterson, the CEO of Anteris Technologies. My name is Jacob Pritchard. I'm an advisor for Fortem Wealth. This webinar is going to be brought to you by Port Jackson Securities. Thanks for coming in, Wayne. How are you feeling today?
Sure, thanks for having me, Jacob. It's a good day. Any day here that's above freezing is a good day.
Exactly right. We're feeling that here in Sydney as well. We're just approaching winter now, and there's definitely some cold days, but it'll be good to see some warmer days, that's for sure. Thanks for coming on again. We're really excited to have you here. It's been a hell of a ride, especially just over the last 12 months, as a few of our clients are aware, and obviously some happy shareholders of yours, which is great. How's the last 12 months been going?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've set out a plan. I mean, we're certainly sticking to that plan, but I would say that of course it's exciting. I mean, the things that motivate me and motivate the team is just how far ahead of the schedule of a big company that we are to actually get something like this done. I mean, the engineers we've got are actually superheroes. I mean, they really are around the clock kind of guys. And what I mean by that is it's not something I say lightheartedly. The team is probably about 3 years ahead of a schedule here. That doesn't allow for a lot of mistakes which you would normally encounter in the development process, because typically a big company might hit a wall, which can happen in development. You take 6 months to correct that. My guys are fixing this stuff in 2 or 3 days, so it is quite an effort to get this product to where it is. But what I'm most excited about, of course, is we have Australian medical technology that is now going global. It's well acknowledged by the medical fraternity, certainly the analysts and bankers in New York, as well as increasingly in Australia as well. So I'm really proud of the fact that we are potentially building another global Australian healthcare company, of which we have some fantastic ones, just not enough of them. I believe this technology certainly puts us in that position.
Perfect. No, we're extremely excited for the next 12 months at the very least. And obviously one of the main products which I believe you're going to be discussing is obviously making the most durable heart valve moving forward, which you're going to discuss in the presentation, which I think a lot of people are going to be excited, especially clients of ours. It's a really cutting edge technology that we're seeing obviously in the devices that you're using. So yeah, if you wanted to go through a presentation, I see obviously everyone can see that the presentation's there, so feel free to take it away, Wayne. We look forward to it.
Great, thanks, David. Yeah, and again, thanks for the opportunity. I made that point about the weather here because it does get to -30 in winter, which was only a few weeks back. So it's good to be above that temperature and be presenting to back home. Now, yeah. I think a couple of things here to keep in mind. Anteris is a company that's had a long history under different guises. I think that's not unusual on the ASX with small cap healthcare companies particularly. But there are 3 very distinct technologies here. They are all competitive in the space. They are all globally acknowledged, and they are validated by physicians who are top of the tree in this space. And that's a big, that's a big claim, and it's sometimes difficult to believe that can be possible. But we're sitting on technologies, frankly, that usually are the domain of very big companies, and there are very clear reasons for that. The least of which is that this is Australian medical technology, which is always, of course, the best. Now, we have created a treatment for the disease called aortic stenosis, and that is the heart valve itself. Now, I just really quickly want to just touch on what is stenosis. Stenosis is a disease where you build up a lot of calcium around the heart valve, your aortic valve particularly. There are multiple valves there, but the aortic valve is the big one that opens and closes, makes sure blood flows one way and doesn't flow back the other. Now, when that valve builds up calcium over time, if you're predisposed, it starts to become dysfunctional to the point where it doesn't work. And if that's not dealt with, of course, you'll have a severe event, a death event. Now, in order to deal with this disease, the only way to treat it is, frankly, to replace that heart valve. And we're in that space. So we're treating aortic stenosis by replacing that aortic valve. Now, this is a USD $10 billion space, all right? So it's growing dramatically. There are only really a couple of players in the market, so it's not a highly fragmented market. They are big companies, but certainly they're of the vein of the companies that I used to work in, big healthcare companies. Now, of the 3 technologies we have, I just want to go through those quickly. The first one is called ADAPT. ADAPT is the anti-calcification treatment that was invented in Australia by a cardiothoracic surgeon called Dr. Leon Needling. We have all of the valves in this space, of course, are treated with an anti-calcification treatment. That's really important because this is a disease of calcium ultimately. So when you put a replacement valve into somebody who's had this disease, of course, it will calcify. So the more anti-calcification treatment you have in there, the better. Now, ADAPT, really importantly here, started life in a different kind of product setting, but certainly in the surgical setting. So we have ADAPT already approved by the FDA. That's important because if you were starting from day one with this material, you'd have to go and get it approved. You'd have to prove biocompatibility. It's a very lengthy process. In fact, because we have had ADAPT for many years, it's certainly given us a shortcut to how quickly we can move this forward, because that's a big part of the development step. We have 20,000 patients running around the world with ADAPT products inside of them. We've also gone head-to-head with the two major players in this market in very structured, statistically powered and controlled studies. Both Edwards and Medtronic against their tissue treatment, their anti-calcification treatment, and we've been proven to be superior in both those runs. We're not surprised by that because we understand the differentiation between our anti-calcification treatment and the others. But calcium is a big player in this disease, so it's really important to be the best. We've proven that we are. I think no one's arguing that ADAPT is certainly the best tissue science in the world. The second thing that we did was then took that material and turned it into a valve. So that's the physical valve that you put into the heart when you're replacing the aortic stenosis valve in these patients. That is called DurAVR. It's made from the ADAPT technology, of course. But the novel technology here is that it's the only 3D single-piece unibody valve. All of the other valves in the marketplace are made up of 3 pieces of tissue sewn into a frame. They're not anatomically correct. They certainly function. But they don't function as well as your normal valve. By the way, you are born with a 3D single piece valve. So this valve is the only one made of 1 piece of tissue. It closely replicates your anatomical valve, so it's anatomically correct. And as a result, we're seeing more normal blood flow than you get with the other valves in the market. And that's been well proven by us. So this is an important breakthrough. Not only will our valve not calcify, but it's also actually working better in patients who get this straight off the table. The third piece of technology, and probably amongst the most important here, is the delivery system itself. These valves are delivered via a catheter, which is inserted into your femoral artery. And that is not a simple device by any stretch. It's a very technical device. We've managed to develop a catheter that has features and functions that are not yet available with the other products in the market. So we've got the trifecta there. We've got the ADAPT anti-calcification treatment. We've got the DurAVR single-piece valve, the only 3D valve, and we've got the CommoSure delivery catheter, which has functions that are not yet available, but certainly have been requested by the physicians we work with. So as I said earlier, the space is growing dramatically, 16% compound annual growth, and will be USD about 10 billion by 2025, although I just heard from one of the analysts at Credit Suisse in New York that in fact might be 11 billion by 2025 due to complications of COVID and other things. So this space is very big and growing dramatically. How do you position our company? Well, Anteris is a mix of biotech and medtech, and of course, a lot of shareholders are aware there's 2 big distinctions here. Biotech generally focus on drug development, bringing compounds to market. That's basically where I spent 20 years of my career in the global drug industry at Merck and Roche. It's a space I know very well. Then there is the medtech space, which is typically bringing devices, more structural mechanical devices to market. And they are 2 very different sectors. Now, Anteris kind of sits in the middle. The ADAPT process is actually a biochemical process, more of a biotech process. It's not something you can readily reverse engineer. It has certainly superior clinical benefits, which have been well proven. And something that gives us a really big moat around the company and protects us. A lot of IP, of course, as well as trade secrets. We're in a biotech-sized space. It's a $10 billion space. It's a very big space. There are not many medtech opportunities, frankly, that have access to markets that big, particularly ones that have very few competitors like this one. We are very clinically differentiated. We've had the benefit of coming to this market later after the 2 competitors have established it. That helps with the commercialization process. We've established a board of medical advisors who are amongst the brightest minds in the world in this space. And they've helped us to develop through some of the shortcomings of the earlier products. Of course, we have that benefit of hindsight, but it means you bring a better product to market. We also have technologies that the others didn't have when they come to market, such as ADAPT and the 3D single-piece valve. So all in all, Anteris is actually positioned extremely well to enter this market. Now, just really quickly, a quick snapshot on how you treat this disease. So severe aortic stenosis is when that valve calcifies. The physicians have to go in and replace that valve, or frankly, you have a high risk of mortality, of course. Now, up until very recently, what they would do is crack your chest open, as you can see in the picture on the left. They would go in there surgically, they would remove your old valve, the calcified valve, and they would put in a new valve. And these valves were made of animal collagen because that gives you the right physical characteristics that emulate the opening and closing of that valve. But of course, they had some downsides. There was problems with the calcification, largely due to the DNA that exists from this material coming from animals, and that causes some other reactions. 7 or 8 years ago, there are a couple of companies that came out with a way of doing this without cracking your chest. It's called a TAVR, a transcatheter aortic valve replacement. Now, this was specifically reserved for patients who are quite elderly, who couldn't undergo the normal procedure of having their chest cracked. They're known as high-risk patients. They're not age-based, but typically they're going to be mid-80s. Now, those patients, if they had aortic stenosis and were diagnosed later, there were not a lot of solutions for them. Generally, you could not crack their chests. Typically, that would be a very high risk of mortality on the table, so it was better avoided. And frankly, they didn't have a lot of solutions. So the valves that came out, they were placed on a catheter. Instead of cracking a chest, you inserted this valve into the femoral artery, which is down near your groin, drove it up over the aorta, as you can see in that picture on the bottom right, put the valve in place, and then withdraw the catheter. Now, there is a big difference in the risk profile of these procedures, of course, and the time it takes. The doctors that work with me can do a TAVR procedure in 25 to 40 minutes. It's very quick. The other side can take hours to do that operation. It's bypass procedure, so it's a very intense procedure. And of course, you take weeks and weeks to recover, up to 6 weeks. The TAVR patients these days are getting out of hospital the very next morning. So it's a significant breakthrough. It was reserved for older patients. It was a great solution to patients who didn't have any solutions. But there were limitations to these procedures in the younger group. Now, what happened in 2019 was that there was a couple of studies that were read out that showed that the use of the TAVR device, the transcatheter device, in younger patients gave them as good outcomes as if they did it surgically. Now, these devices were not used in younger patients before. There's no surprises with this, but the FDA then said, great, go ahead and use these in younger patients. So what happened? The mean age of patients went from 85 to 73 in 1 year, 2020. Right, so it shifted dramatically the curve of who was getting these valves. Now, why is that important? Because younger patients have different needs to older patients for these valves. There are 2 limitations with the current valves. One, they don't give you normal blood flow. They will certainly keep you alive, and they certainly work well. And in an 85-year-old patient who may be less active, they work okay. They will take you from severe aortic stenosis in terms of blood pressure down to mild stenosis. And then they start to decline. The valve will start to wear down, and you'll end up in moderate. And if you live long enough, you'll end up back in severe stenosis. So that's the first problem. They don't last very long, maybe 5 years. At 85, typically the patient and the valve will probably have the same lifespan roughly. When you get to a 73-year-old, which is where these valves are now being used, and this is what's driving, of course, the market uptake, the growth of these products is because there's a much bigger patient pool now using them. These patients are obviously younger. They're probably more active. They're probably playing golf, walking around the block, whatever they're doing. They need more normal blood flow. Now, the current valves don't take you out of stenosis. They leave you in mild, and then you regress from there. But the other thing is they are needing a valve that lasts 10 or 15 years, not 5. And that's the biggest problem. Now, the market knew that the valves were short-lived. They knew that they didn't give you normal blood flow. All those things were well known. They're not surprises. But it didn't really matter in the older patient group because they were adequate for what they were designed for. The problem was only 1 year ago when these came into younger patients. Now, you're looking at a picture on the bottom right that's one of the current valves that's already calcified. This is what it looks like when it calcifies, the replacement valve. So it just ceases to function. They have to replace it, and replacing it is a real problem. So when you're down into these younger patients, it opened up a whole new need for a product like ours. And of course, what we've brought to market meets the needs of the current age group, which didn't exist up until a year ago. So there are 4 key things that these products need to achieve. One is a predictable procedure. I think all of the current devices that in the market certainly achieve that. We can do these procedures very quickly, 25 to 40 minutes, and the valve is in place and the patient is finished. They should give optimal hemodynamic performance. They work, but they don't take you into pre-stenosis. They don't take you back into the normal range for blood pressure because there are limitations in their design. They just don't open wide enough to give you the right blood flow. They're adequate, but they don't take you back to normal. So they don't quite achieve that second box. Complications are pretty low relative to the alternative, which is having your chest cracked. There are some complications of this kind of procedure, but it's very low. And then durability. Durability refers to how long the valve will last. And we know the current valves start to degrade, frankly, within 1 year, even if they're functioning in your body. But they certainly start to get very stretched and stressed within 5 years. So if that patient is still alive, typically what can happen is they'll try and put another valve on top of that through a catheter. And of course, that valve is operating in a very restricted environment. Of course, at that point, it's palliative, it's not curative. So there are 2 boxes here that the current devices meet really well, and 2 that they kind of meet. Then DurAVR, our product, really addresses all 4 of these. And of course, the procedure, it's a catheter-based product with some innovations around that. We've shown in humans that this 3D single-piece valve, remember, it's different to every other valve out there. They're all 3-piece valves. This is a single-piece valve like the valve you're born with. In our human studies so far in the surgical setting, we've been able to deliver normal pre-disease hemodynamics, normal pre-disease blood pressures. To give you an indication of what that is, when you present with severe aortic stenosis, there's a blood pressure measurement called mean gradient, and you will have a mean gradient of around about 50 millimeters of mercury. That's very high. Normal is 5, by the way, just to give you an indication as how far that blood pressure goes up. And of course, it's very dangerous at that point. The current products in the market will leave you off the table when you come out with a brand new valve between 10 and 15 millimeters of mercury. So and remembering 5 is normal. So you're not yet at normal, but you're in that mild stenosis range, which is completely functional. And then over time, it might drop off to 20, 30, and finally you end up with severe. Now, the DurAVR valve in the studies we've done so far leave you with a mean gradient of 5 millimeters of mercury. So that's the normal range. And it's because of the design of the valve. It's not a random event. We understand why we're getting these different results. Complications for us are on a par with everybody else. Some pacemaker rates, some perivalvular leak, and so on, but pretty manageable. And then durability. This single-piece valve goes longer. It has more structural integrity than the 3-piece valves. 3-piece valves are put together with 600 sutures, by the way. We have about 60, give or take. So there's an order of magnitude less hole in the tissue, right? Each one of those sutures is a hole in the tissue we consider. And the doctors have known this for a long time. There just wasn't a solution for that. Now, the single-piece design, it has more structural integrity. No one's had these valves in humans for 10 or 15 years, by the way, so there's no long-term data on these things. But we do know when they wear out. And I'll show you some durability data. So durability is a function of a couple of things. One is mechanical wear and tear, and the other thing is calcification. Remember, we have the best calcification treatment out there. So this valve is anatomically correct. We have a much bigger opening area than the current competitive valves. And if you think about how pressure works, if you squeeze off that opening, the pressure goes up like the hose in your garden. When you squeeze it, you get higher pressure. When you have it opening wider, you get lower pressure, which is what you want to achieve in this disease. We have a 35% reduction in, let's say, mechanical wear and tear over the current products. That's really important. But most importantly, we're getting that hemodynamic performance, which is back in the range of normal. So those 3 core technologies are paramount to success in this space. You can't just have a valve and a tissue treatment. You've got to have the best. So DurAVR is the only 3D valve. We know that. Sure. It works better as a result of that design. Adapt tissue anti-calcification treatment has been studied and proven head-to-head studies against the current market leaders, but also, of course, used in humans, 20,000 of them across the world. And then our delivery catheter, which is novel in itself. I just want to make a really quick point on calcification. This is a disease of calcium. Aortic stenosis is where your valve calcifies. You're looking at one right there. That's a replacement valve, by the way. And there's a very clear reason why this calcification occurs. The material we use, everyone's using, is an animal collagen, either bovine or porcine, cow or pig. The cow is generally coming from Australia for every device in the world because we don't have BSE or mad cows down there. Apparently, our cows are not crazy in Australia. So that material is then used, and that material is great because the collagen has the physical characteristics that you require in one of these valves to kind of work like your old valve did. The problem is when you take that material, it has foreign DNA on it. It comes from a different animal. Now, of course, it has to go through a process before it's suitable for use in humans. We all have a process. And that process is designed to remove as much of that DNA as you possibly can, but it never removes all of the DNA, and that's the big contributor. ADAPT is the only one, to our knowledge, that we've studied. We've certainly studied everybody else's material out there, that has been able to remove the majority, if not all, of the residual DNA. So our scaffold is like a synthetic material, but with the physical characteristics of the collagen that you need, but the biological profile of a synthetic. This is kind of nirvana, and it's very unheard of. It did take Professor Needling about 20 years to get to this point, so it's not something you invent overnight and not something you can easily copy. But that DNA is what causes what's known as an immune response. So there's an immunological response from your body. That leads to inflammation, because that's what your immune system does. It builds up inflammation, and then that leads to calcification. So if there's more DNA there, you get more calcification. That's why these replacement valves ultimately fail. The ADAPT valve has superior calcification treatment, so we don't calcify as much, if at all, and we don't know the answer to if at all until 15 years from now. But certainly every indication is that without DNA, you don't get calcification. There are other issues around why these valves don't last a distance. I won't get into those too much. This is just a quick snapshot of our studies against Edwards, which has 65% market share in the TAVR space right now, showing a very well-structured study where we beat their tissue material, their calcification material, and also Medtronic's AOA. So both the company competitors, we've done structured studies and beaten them head-to-head. That's an important distinction. One of the important things to test the longevity of a valve is to put them in these special machines, and these machines emulate the heartbeat. And as you can see on the far right, that's a DurAVR valve. It's a work of art when you're looking at a single piece valve like that, and physicians frankly look at that and get blown away because they haven't seen a single piece valve. It billows instead of slaps. So the conventional valves made of 3 pieces, they really pull themselves across the frame, and our valve is really billowing the way your valve is intended. But what's important on this diagram, our longest valves have gone out to about 15 years now. So these accelerate the aging of the valve. There's fluid being punched through that valve. They open and close. And we have banks and banks of these machines. It's not that you have one. What we discovered is that not only do our valves last a long time, they keep going, but they don't reduce in function in a significant way. So regular valves start to decline in their opening. Their opening gets narrow and narrow before they cease to function. Our valve pretty much looks the same on day 1 as it does at year 15. And that's important as we remember we're going to put these into younger patients. This is without the calcification stuff, by the way. It's a bonus on top of this. Now, the FDA mandates that you pass 200 million cycles before they'll even talk to you, of course. And the average valve probably goes to 200, 300, 400 cycles, something like that, on the cycle tester. So we're well past beyond what is normally seen with these kind of valves. It's got to be proven in humans over 10 or 15 years. I'd make that point very clearly, but nobody has that that information at this point because we don't have patients out that far. What we can say is that the structural integrity of this valve is different because of that single piece design, and therefore there are very good reasons why this will translate to patients in the future. We've got human studies ongoing. I think you're looking at an echo here of a DurAVR valve in a patient. If you are already invested in Anteris, that's got to make you proud. That's a patient in Europe who has a piece of that Australian technology right there, and it's working a treat. Now, what I really want to show from this study, it is a surgical study, so that means these patients did have their chest cracked and had the DurAVR valve put in that way. The reason we did that was it allowed us to get early information on these valves because the catheter development was not complete when we started the study. It now is getting there. Now, the thing to look at, if you remember what I said about mean gradients, the normal range is 5. And when you're sick with aortic stenosis, you get up to about 50. The average, we have a comparison here of surgical valves. So the average mean gradient that these patients are coming out with the other products is 11. With a DurAVR valve, they're coming out with 5. That's smack and bang in the middle of the normal range. The opening orifice, it's a little technical detail, but worthy of note. Your normal EOA, your opening orifice, is about 3 centimeters. And when you've got aortic stenosis, it can go down to 0.5 or 1 centimeter. And of course, the smaller that hole, the higher the blood pressure, and the two things correlate. Now, our patients are getting EOA of 3, the normal range, and typically a commercial valve will give you 30, 40% less than that. So you can see why the valve is working better. It's a different design. It's opening in a much more anatomical way, and is of course delivering better results. Now, Professor Maris is very well known globally. He's very well published, of course. And he's done a lot of this early valve work for a lot of the big companies. This is the guy you go to when you want this stuff done. And he came out, which is a big statement for an academic, and said that he hadn't seen these results with commercially available valves. And that's a fact. Nobody's seen these results before. I'm not sure if the market has fully caught up with the fact how significant that is. Now, every year there are multiple global medical conferences. These are not just conferences where doctors and nurses go, although they certainly attend. These are big business, big conferences where academics get to present the latest data. So the industry goes, there are often 5,000 or 10,000 delegates going to these things. And it's really where the latest and greatest stuff is spoken about. One of the most important meetings in the world is PCR London Valve, which is held just in November. It's gone. It's every year, of course. This year it was virtual. And there is one of the sessions they have is the best innovation. We were awarded the best innovation award at this meeting when Professor Meares presented. Now, this is a highly competitive process. Of course, everybody would love to get this award, and it's judged by a panel of cardiologists, of course. Now, we got that because of the date of the human study so far. We haven't finished that study, but Professor Meares presented the data that he had to date, 6 or 7 patients at that point, and showing the normal results, and we won the Best Innovation Award. So that's a huge accolade, and more importantly, it's an acknowledgement by the medical fraternity and experts that we have science that is credible and certainly valuable. We are supported by a medical advisory board. This is an important distinction. It is not easy to put together a board of experts like this. They've been working with us for 2.5, almost 3 years now. And the reason it's not easy is because when you're a small company, you generally don't have technology that excites people like this. These people are extremely well known by all the big companies. They're well known on the podiums. They're well known to all the analysts in New York, and they're well known academically, of course. For example, Dr. Kapadia Samir here is the director of Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic is the biggest cardiac center in the world and certainly the most prestigious. You typically wouldn't see Cleveland Clinic in a small company unless you were credible. Professor Reardon, Mike, he was the principal author of that study that I mentioned earlier that allowed the FDA to use these TAVR devices in younger patients. He ran that study, so he's highly credible. Dr. Prendergast is the head of St. Thomas's Hospitals in London. Of course, we're looking at our European registration pathway as well. He's highly respected. They're all, I won't go through them all, you can Google them at some point. All of these gentlemen are extremely well known and amongst the brightest minds in the space. So I'd like to just conclude this part now and just remind you that there are 3 real components here to look at. One is the anti-calcification process. It's essential, of course. Ours is ADAPT, and we're the only company actually that has shown 0 calcification in humans over 10 years. We're the only ones globally. So this is a disease of calcium, so this is really important. DurAVR, the only single piece, the only 3D single piece valve, that unibody design certainly gives us much more structural integrity, but gives us a better opening, and therefore we're seeing these normal blood flows. And then the catheter device, Comissure, in which we load the valve and then deliver this valve into the patient, was designed, frankly, by the physicians with our engineers. They said the features they wanted that weren't currently available. It was a big task, but the engineers are that brilliant in our company that they got it done. So if you want to think about what it is we do, the DurAVR valve, in essence, it lasts longer. We know that goes out to 15 years because that structure is different, and it works better. We're seeing normal blood flows, normal gradients, if you like, and normal opening areas that you just don't see with the existing valves. So given that the younger patients are getting these products now, there's obviously a huge need for this product. Most important, and what I'm certainly very proud of, is that we are building a very credible Australian healthcare company. And I think one that certainly is obviously global. Patients will be getting this product very soon. With the FDA, we'll certainly be approving our EFS study in the coming back end of this year. So the first human patients in the US will be getting a DurAVR valve early into next year. And then beyond that, we'll be into Europe and other places. So we can all be very proud, if you're an investor in this company, that the flag is flying high and the technology is certainly very, very credible. So I'll park it there, Jake, and go to any questions if you have them.
Perfect. No, thanks for that, Wayne. I think that's given everyone a pretty clear outlook of the business, where you guys have been going. I think we're incredibly impressed. Obviously, you've come into this business recently as well, within the last 24 months, and the issues that you guys have really tackled, which has been quite impressive. Firstly, obviously, the medium age of this disease coming into fact, and you guys have come in straight away to provide a more durable product, which is awesome. I think it's also quite scary that previously they were also using a valve that wasn't you guys, but in the market previously, a valve that wasn't really, I guess, synthesizing with the Australian body or with the patient's body that well. And then to fix it when it wasn't working that well, they would just insert another one in. It's great that you guys have definitely fixed that. So that looks really good moving forward. Now, looking at it, I've got a few questions here from some clients, some shareholders as well. You've obviously discussed in that presentation that you've done the 3 technologies that you guys have got. great explanation there. Product development, regulatory process, you also touched on that as well. In regards to market opportunity for, I guess, current and future shareholders as well, what's something that you're pretty excited about in regards to that over the next year or two?
Well, I mean, excited. You know, how big is that list? Now, I will preface this by saying I spent 20 years in big pharma. My accent is Australian, but I left 20 years ago, and I've lived in 7 countries and been in the C-suite of some of the biggest companies out there. As such, I've launched 36 drugs around the world, some of them multi-billion-dollar drugs, big ones. And what I can say to that is that this would be in the top 3 products that I have launched in my career for reasons that it is clinically relevant, that it is strategically competitive, and that there is a gaping need in the market. And that, for me, is what first thing I'm excited about. Frankly, as a small company, if we didn't have a shot, it would be a fool's errand if you thought you could take on one of the biggest companies in the space with average technology. You have to have really good tech. Otherwise, you just aren't playing. Now, what's also exciting about this space, there's only 2 players. One of them has 65% market share. Now, if you think about that, and this product, certainly we know for a fact right now, has got better data than that product. And that product is older, as you pointed out. I don't think that, you know, that they were premature with these products. I think they offered solutions to older patients, and they were really focused on the delivery as opposed to the valve science, because it mattered less about the valve science if the patient and the valve lifespan was 5 years, let's say. I know it sounds a little mercenary. It's not quite like that. It was a perfect storm for us when it went down the line to these younger patients, because we were right in the middle of development, and it just so occurred that our technologies perfectly went into that space. But we had the benefit of hindsight. So I'm excited by the fact that of the market that's not fragmented, we've got a captive audience with our advisory board. I mean, these doctors manage 300-400 TAVRs themselves in their centers. They own this product. They've helped develop it. They all want to use this the day it gets out there. So if we went commercial solo, you know, it's not difficult to imagine in a space worth 10 billion, if you take 10%, you know, you're at 1 billion, and so it goes. So getting small amounts of market share equals large dollar paybacks. I sat on a NASDAQ board, a healthcare company, where we had 500 million in sales, and we sold that company for 5 billion with Goldman Sachs. So even 500 million in sales, which is what, 5% market share, you end up with big market caps. And that's exciting, obviously, for shareholders who've been on this ride for a while. But the most important thing for me is the fact that we've got the flag flying over it. We've taken this technology to the world, and it's going to go in patients all over the world. This will save a lot of lives in the future.
Perfect. No, well said. Well said. Now, I've got a question from one of my clients here. Now, he's addressed 2020 has been a huge wake-up call for many businesses. Some would say probably one of the most difficult years over the last 2 decades. Obviously, some companies use this as a way to sort of build up their business, really focus on some technologies that they were providing and what they were going to provide moving forward. From what I can see, obviously reading this question, Anteris sort of has come out of the gates running pretty fast after 2020. Is that how you feel as well?
Yeah, I'd love to say it was a stroke of genius. It wasn't, but we had the right, you know, you can argue sometimes in a small cap. I spent my career in big New York listed companies, you know, multi-billion dollar market caps. The small cap company is a different animal, of course, and you could argue some days that things don't always go your way in the market. But I can tell you one thing that went absolutely our way was the timing of a transaction we did in November of 2019, where we basically got rid of our commercial portfolios and sold them on under license. Pre-COVID, not knowing, of course, that COVID was coming. What that enabled us to do was bank a big chunk of cash, so therefore non-dilutive capital. But also we got rid of a big pile of costs, all of the headcount. Now, what happened to companies in the space who had reps out there and medical products? All the hospitals shut down in the US. In the Northern Hemisphere, basically the hospitals stopped working to preserve their ventilators for COVID patients and so on. So sales tanked for everybody, but you had to carry the cost of all these field forces. So, you know, we did come out running because we were able to get that transaction done. We had a big chunk of cash at the start of COVID, and we basically eliminated all of those costs, which would have been redundant. We would have had the cost of no incoming revenues, which would have been a very difficult position. What we did through 2020 was, I think, accelerated the development process beyond what's reasonable. The guys just jammed out experiments, studies, development. The doctors work with us. I mean, we really got a lot done as a result. When we hit 2021, we had the FDA study approval in our sites, and we're on track to achieve that. So we got lucky, but I'll take the good with the bad on this one. And you know, it's the luck of the draw sometimes, and just you have to kind of give thanks for where you can when you get lucky.
Yeah, give credit where it's due. And look, obviously, and that you guys, as you said that you've struck it pretty lucky. Look, shareholders are happy at the end of the day. We're happy, and it's a much better than it going the other way. That's for sure. I've got another question here. Look, I wanted to say personally from me, I think the shareholders also stating as well. You guys have done a great work over the last 12 months, business-wise, management. Obviously, as you said, you sold look, we can say that you did sell a large amount of your commercial portfolio, which really recapitalized the business really well to position, obviously, for the market that we saw. But you personally, what do you feel that what are you most impressed about business-wise in terms of Anteris over the last 12 months?
Look, it's very easy, Jacob. In my career, I've been responsible for a number of turnarounds, emerging markets. For Merck, Japan, I had to turn around. And Europe, region Europe, I had to turn around billions of dollars in sales. This was a turnaround and a restructure. It started with a process a few years back, and it did take some time. But you know what I'm pleased about, if I can say that, is that we were able to get rid of the things in this company that were not going to drive the investment thesis beyond anything mediocre. They weren't certainly going to make the family fortune. They just didn't have the strategy or the available markets, or you know, we weren't playing to the strengths of our technology. Certainly with ADAPT, it was in a different environment to what this is. So I'm pleased that process is finally completed, and that we're able to pivot the business into a very single focus, structural heart company, and capitalize on the strengths of the technology that we had already previously, you know, developed, and then taken that to the world. Now, we're not there yet, but we are certainly, you know, the finish line is certainly within sight, whereas a few years back it was not. You know, there's no ambiguity about where we're headed with this business, or there's no hope that springs eternal that in 5 years we might get there. We know where we're headed, and it's a window that investors can live with. It's not 25 years from now, you know, wondering what this company is going to be.
For sure. I think a good thing about the 2020, we'll call it a bit of a shakeout. Any businesses or direct competitors to you that weren't as well capitalized, you know, have really had a tough time. Not to wish bad on any other businesses or anything like that, but it's given a really clear track for businesses that have positioned themselves well and are obviously doing the right things to provide better products, obviously, that we can see in Australia. So that's a great situation to be in. Now, I guess.
Point there,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. You get the right thing there. You know, we can talk about capitalization and strategy and what we're proud of and what excites us. I think at the end of the day, I've been in healthcare my whole career, pharmaceuticals particularly, that when you bring solutions for patients that don't exist, that's the most gratifying thing you can honestly do on any given day at work. And that's where we've landed with this.
No, completely agree. And yeah, how rewarding that must be for you. I can only imagine. Next 12 months, what are you most excited for Anteris?
Well, several things I can mention and several I cannot.
Yeah, of course.
If you tune into the AGM in July, there'll certainly be some updates there that will speak to part of that question. I'm excited right now for the FDA study to commence. It's my single focus. I mean, the development teams are still working. We have a regular interaction with the FDA, of course, to ensure that we're on track. There is a list of experiments and tests we have to get through. Some of those we're in the middle of, some we've completed, and some we have yet to do. It's all within our timeline. So, you know, we are progressing on schedule to have our FDA study approval within Q4. And then beyond that, we'll have our first patients. That's really exciting for all of us. And the experiments we've gotten through so far have met the criteria of the FDA, so we're on track.
Lovely. Okay, I've got a final question here as well. You've touched on it, I think, a time or so ago, but just so shareholders and I guess prospective investors can really have this clear, what sets Anteris apart from its direct competitors that you're finding in its current market?
Yeah, well, two things. One is market cap. Our big direct competitor has a market cap of 55 billion built on this same kind of product, and we have a market cap of 50. That'll give you some indication as to what the scale here is, or the potential, I should say. Not that I think we will get 55, but we certainly get a lot higher than where we are today. But, you know, the competitors came to market with these products, as I pointed out earlier, in a way that solved that particular problem, which was older patients who needed valves, who couldn't have their chest cracked. Now, as a result of that, there were other things that weren't addressed, not through anyone's fault, but they were very much focused on this device going into patients via a catheter. It was only in 2019, 2020 when that age shifted down to younger patients, and suddenly the requirement changed of the existing products. So the strength we bring over the current products is the tissue science. We've beaten them all in proper experiments. So we know we calcify less, and it's a disease of calcium. So if you live longer, this becomes more important. The single piece 3D, the 3D single piece valve, it works better because it's designed more anatomically. And finally, this delivery system, I didn't really get into the detail, but there are elements and aspects of this catheter that are very, very technical, basically giving you the ability to line the new valve up perfectly where the old valve sat. That decreases wear and tear, and it increases blood flow. The current catheters cannot do that. It's called commissure alignment. The current catheters are not able to drop the valve right where it needs to be. If it lands there, it's random, that's great. But more often than not, it probably won't. So this is a huge step forward. This was requested by the physicians on our advisory board, and they helped design it. So if you take the three, I would say we win on all three technologies. Tissue science is better, the valve is working better, and the catheter is better.
For sure, for sure. No, well said again, Wayne. We're pretty impressed. So we've only got about 2 minutes here, so I'll wrap this up. Now, I would like to say as well, if anyone viewing, any shareholders, prospective shareholders as well, would like any questions to be answered, I'm going to be sending through a copy of this link through to everyone. Now, if you do have any questions that you would like me to pass on to Wayne, I know Wayne's really responsive with a lot of his shareholders, but I'm sure he'll be pleased if I get a bunch of questions through and I pass it on to him. Happy to give you some personalized responses. But yeah, to finalize this, we're really excited for this AGM coming up in July. Extremely impressed with the management that you've provided and the guidance, obviously, for Anteris over the last 12 months. So thank you on behalf of shareholders, and we look forward to seeing what you guys do in the next 12 months.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for the opportunity to present. I always enjoy it. And like you said, I love getting shareholder emails. So feel free to send them along, and I certainly respond to them within 24 hours where I can.
Perfect. All right, Wayne. Well, thanks again for attending. Glad to hear the weather's warming up a little bit there. It's not sub-zero again, and look forward to seeing you guys again. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into the webinar. We'll see you guys at the AGM. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.